give a brief introduction to the dress pattern we are going to be making today. Like I mentioned in the pattern blocks we have the front bodice pattern, that is from shoulder to waist, front of it. We have the back bodice pattern, shoulder to waist, back of it. We have the front skirt or trouser pattern, that's waist to the knee for the front. Then we have the back skirt or trouser pattern, that's from the waist to the knee for the back also. Then we have the sleeves pattern, that's for the two hands. Okay, so when we want to draft pattern, we usually draft half of whatever we are doing. If it is the front bodice pattern, we draft half of it. If it is the back bodice pattern, we draft half of it. The reason is, when we want to place the pattern paper on our fabric to cut, we usually fold the fabric so that we will cut together. If we do it separately, if we don't do it that way, if we do like a full pattern and do it separately, by the time we are adding our allowance, like they say, fingers are not equal. You could do something on one side that does not happen on the other side, and that's going to affect your fit or the overall outlook of your piece. So it's always preferable to draft half of this thing, half down. You draft one side, then you place it on fold. In case you're even making mistake, you will make the same mistake on the two sides, so it will be uniform. I hope you understand. And then there's something we call the bust separation line. Some people call it balance line. It is also called plumb line. It is an imaginary line that divides the center of the bust, the waist, the hip, down to your legs. It is just an imaginary line, it is not physical. So we always draft from that bust separation line or balance line to the side of whether the front or the back or whatever we are doing.
Before we go into how to draft a dress pattern, let me quickly show you what I was trying to explain earlier. This pattern, for example, was draft as, a half of the front and the half of the back. One part representing the front while the other part is representing the back. I'll use my tracing wheel now to transfer to the other part to represent when you're actually cutting your fabric on fold to reveal the two sides of both the front and the back. You see what it looks like when it's open now. The center represents the front while the two sides represent the back, being separated by that portion where we're going to put our zip. So now I'm trying to fold it for you to see what the dress shape looks like just before we take in all the necessary darts and shapes around the pattern. Now I'm going to separate this pattern to reveal the true shape of the dress, and so that I can take off all the excesses necessary. And this is what it looks like: the wider piece for the front and the two smaller pieces for the back to be joined by the zipper. I just joined the back pieces together, and this is how it should look. Not very flat, but it should have some shape at the center back, because the back view of the figure of a woman is not very flat, but she has a butt, she has a back area that kind of goes slants inward, and all this should be revealed in the pattern. And while drafting the pattern shortly, I'm going to show you how to achieve all of this. Another thing that gives a good shape and a good fit to your garment is dart. So you're going to take in your dart at the back and also at the front to give it a very nice shape, so that it follows the natural figure of the woman very smoothly and comes out very well. Now let's get started with how to draft a dress pattern. For this class, you need your ruler, you need your curves. You can decide to use the pattern master or the armhole curve. You also need your tape. You need your pencil and eraser in case you make a mistake. My widest horizontal measurement is 36. 36 divided by 2 is 18. 18 plus 1 is 19. So I'm going to be marking 19 inches down the paper, and I'll be connecting with my ruler. Next is to mark the length of my dress. Mine is 40, and that's the exact length of the paper. If it was 35, for example, I would mark 35 and rule across to get the working space. Step 3. Divide into two equal parts and label the first part front and the next part back. Please take note of this. There are some measurements we usually plot while we are making our patterns that are not taken directly from the body, but they are derived through some calculations that have been made. So these things are constant. They are constant calculations that we make. And that would be the concept of the chest line. Chest line is gotten by dividing the bust into 6 and adding 1.5. My bust 34 divided by 6 plus 1.5 would give me 7.2 approximately. So I'll locate that on the tape and mark as the first line. Then I'll mark the remaining vertical points 10, 16, and 26 on both sides and use my ruler to connect all through. Now the next step is to label the first line chest, the next line bust, the next one waist, and the next one hip. Step 6. Divide your shoulder measurements by 2 and mark on both the front and the back side as shown. Go to your chest line, repeat the same process. Use a ruler to connect the lines. Next is our neckline. There are standard measurements for the neckline. Generally, we use 3 by 3 for the front, 3 by 1 for the back. So you mark 3 inches towards the side and mark 3 inches downwards. You square it up and use your curve to draw a curved line to connect the two sides together. For the back, you mark 3 inches towards the side and 1 inch downwards, and you repeat the same process as you did for the front. Next is the shoulder slant. Naturally, human shoulders are not straight. They are not parallel to the ground like that. They are slightly slanted towards the ground. So it is always good to show this while we're making our pattern so that the clothes can sit conveniently on our shoulders. And we do that by marking 1/2 inch down on both sides as shown and connecting it to our necklines for both the back and the front. Next thing to draft is our armhole line, and we do this by going up on the chest line for the front by 2 inches. I'm just trying to label all those lines so that they don't get you confused. That's the neckline. The slanted one is the shoulder slant. The vertical one is the armhole line. So you go up the front armhole line by 2 inches and mark. For the back, you will divide the armhole line into 2 equal parts. For easy division, you can just place your tape on that line and fold your tape into 2. That's where you get the half points. You mark those points.
Okay. So now that we've gotten our armhole curve points, we'll come this place inside by 0.75. That is here. We'll come to the back inside by 1/2 inch. Okay. Then you will use your ruler. You connect from this point to this point and stop. You connect from this point to this point also and stop. Then you drop your ruler, you get your curve and use your curve to connect to your chest line. If you place your curve like this and connect, when you are drawing this line, it's going to disconnect from this part. So you keep turning your curve until you get to the point where this line will connect to this line without a disconnect. So you see, it's still not connecting. I'll keep turning it. You see, there's still a little space. I'll keep turning it till I get to that point where this one will continuously join this one. And that's how to use my armhole curve. The next thing I'll do is to come here and do the same. There's still a disconnect. I'll keep turning it until there's no longer a disconnect. So we are done with drafting our armhole.
The next step is to construct our darts. And to construct the darts, we need a line called the bust span line. Now, the bust span is the distance between one bust and the other, specifically the nipple, one nipple to the other nipple. You could decide to take this measurement on your model or wherever you're making the dress for. But generally, we have parameters that we use for this bust span. In one of our paid classes, I'll be teaching you how to calculate bust span for different sizes. But for the purpose of this measurement I'm using, I'm going to be using a bust span of 8. Now remember that we are making half of the front and half of the back. That means I'll be using 4 instead, because 8 divided by 2 is 4. So I'll be measuring 4 from the beginning of my front paper on my bust line, waistline, and hip line. I'll be doing the same thing for the back on my bust line, waistline, and hip line. I'll be measuring 4 inches each from the beginning of those parts. Next is to connect with my ruler. So I have 2 straight lines on the 2 sides. Then go down from your waistline by 4 inches on both sides. Also mark ½ inch towards the 2 opposite sides of the bust span line for both the front and the back. This should be done on the waistline. Then connect all those points together as shown. To avoid a bulge around the zip area, go to the edge of the back. On the waistline, mark ½ inch inward and 4 inches downwards. Then use a straight line to connect all the points as you see in the video. Now divide your horizontal measurements by 4. That is the bust, the waist, and the hip. The horizontal measurements, divide them by 4 and mark them on both the front and the back. 34 divided by 4, for example, will give me 8.5. I'll mark it. The next thing is the waist. 28 divided by 4 is 7. I'll also mark 7. Then I'll add 1 to that 7, making 8. Why I'm doing this is because I marked ½ inch on both sides for the darts. ½ inch on 2 sides, that's 1 inch. That 1 inch, I'll add it back to the side, because by the time I take in the 1 inch, it's going to be short of 1 inch. So I need to add it back to that part so that it won't affect my measurements. Then I'll go to the hip and do the same thing. 36 divided by 4, that would give me 9. I'll also go to the hem of the gown and mark the same hip measurement divided by 4. So I'll mark the same 9 and I'll be connecting later. I'll repeat the same process for the back. There's something I want you to note. When I want to mark on the waistline, I'm going to start from that back snatching point and not from the beginning of the paper. Next, I'll be connecting all those points together with straight lines. I'll do the same for front and the back. If I want it to be a pencil gown, that is, I want it to be fitted around my thigh, I'll come in on the hemline by ½ inch and connect from the hip to that line. I'll repeat the same process at the back. Next, I'll label my pattern as shown: center front, center back, side front, side back, and so on. Lastly, I'll be cutting out my pattern.
Welcome to class. For this class, you'll be needing your pattern, some pins, your tape, your scissors, your chalk. I'll be using a marker so you can see clearly, and of course your fabric. This is the fabric I'll be using too. There's a particular direction you have to follow while you are folding your fabric, and there is a reason for this. I'll be explaining details on that in our paid classes. Sometimes people make certain styles or designs, and even though they follow the right processes, they see that they are not getting the desired outcome and they are wondering where they went wrong. Sometimes it is because of how you fold your fabric. If you don't fold it the right direction, it's not going to give you the desired outcome. So do well to sign up for our paid classes so that we can show you why some things happen and how you can avoid certain things.
First, I'll be placing my front pattern on the fabric. I'll make sure the fabric is folded, and I'll be placing the center front on that folded part. I'll be adding my desired allowance and I'll cut out. Next, I'll be transferring my dart from the pattern to the fabric, and I'll use my pencil to mark it. This is what it will look like by the time I open it. I'll repeat the same process for the back. The only difference will be that I'm going to add zipper allowance to the back, and I won't cut the back on fold. Instead, I'll cut 2 pieces of the back. Note that you can make the neck wider if you want, or deeper, depending on what you want. So I'm just trying to alter my own neckline to make it slightly wider and slightly deeper. Next, I'll be cutting something we call facing for my neckline finishing so that the raw edges don't begin to come out.
Now to the sewing part. First, I'll be sewing in my darts. Next, I'll be fixing the facing on the necklines. After that, I'll be joining the shoulders, joining the sides, fixing the zips, and doing the finishing. And voila! This is our finished dress. This is the effect of the back snatching I was talking about earlier. It makes the clothes lie flat on the back and gives a very pleasant look.